So, my name is Joe Sullivan. I am with the Center for Energy and Environment. I'm a manager of strategic relations there. I think first I'd like to start with a little bit about CE, who we are. Actually, what I'd first like to talk about, how does our presentations fit together? My presentation was a little bit more macro, a little bit higher level about what's happening in Minnesota, where we've been, and where we're going. And how this fits in is Jared's fits in within where we're going, and I think there's a nice synergy there. But mine's a little bit more on the kind of academic side of what's happening to the system as a whole, and then what is the clean energy opportunity? What is the size of the market that is going to be there over the next 20 and 30 years? And you'll see it's a massive market that is there. So first, who CE is? CE is we're a 36-year-old nonprofit based here in Minneapolis. Our mission is to discover and to deploy the most cost-effective, most effective energy solutions for a healthy, low-carbon economy. We have about 80 staff based here in Minneapolis. Our staff focuses on technical research. One of the things that people don't know about CE is that we've got some of the greatest researchers in the world. We're kind of like a national lab based here in Minnesota. A lot of our researchers have actually made tours through national labs. We kind of have a revolving door between the two. So we've got some fantastic technical capability and researchers. We do engineering service and delivery. These are the engineers that we work with who actually go into buildings like the IDS Tower right now and do energy optimizations for buildings. And not just the IDS Tower, but throughout Minnesota. We've worked throughout the state. We do clean energy financing. We've got a table here. We're really happy and proud of our new $50,000 solar loan that I think we've been talking about throughout the event here, which we're very excited about. But we've done financing for a long time, for 30 years, and it's low interest financing. And we're doing an increasing amount of community energy planning for large and smaller cities. So we've worked extensively with the city of Minneapolis, and we're working with smaller cities throughout the state like Red Wing and others. So I should have gone to the slide. But first, a little bit about Minnesota. Minnesota energy politics. This is kind of where it all starts. As the chair of our House Energy Committee, Chairman Pat Garofalo mentions frequently, Minnesota's had divided government for 22 of the last 25 years. We are a coal-dominant state. We are still a coal-dominant state, and we have almost 200 electric utilities. Now, I think that this is a pretty incredible that, given these factors, we're a national clean energy leader. Politically, that is hard to believe that we're a national clean energy leader given that. So, some of the amazing framework that we put together over the last 25 years, and really Minnesota's energy policy does go back quite a ways to the early 1990s. But on energy efficiency, we've saved Minnesotans over $6 billion. Minnesota ratepayers, or as I like to call them, bill payers, we've saved them more than $6 billion. On renewable energy, Minnesota has now developed more than 3,600 megawatts of wind is serving Minnesota. And with the addition of, I believe, about 400 megawatts of wind this year, we're going to be up at about 4,000 megawatts of wind capacity serving Minnesota. You'll see as I get into the presentation later what a large percentage of Minnesota's energy now comes from wind. We've reduced our coal dependency from just a little bit under 75% to about 50%, and all the benefits that come with that, health benefits, climate benefits, and increasingly cost benefits. And most importantly, we've reduced our carbon emissions from 2005 by 20%. This is why Minnesota's Pollution Control Agency just a couple weeks ago said, we're halfway there to meeting our Clean Power Plan requirements, and that the current suite of policies that Minnesota has on the books are likely, maybe a little fine tweaking here and there, but we're going to get there with what we've got on the books mostly. So the transformation so far, I love this slide. I put this together yesterday after looking at some other slides, and there's a couple variants of it out there. But in 1990, you can see where we were in 1990. This is 1990 is the year I started high school. Seems like not so long ago for me, but 25 years ago. We were basically there were two resources on the system, and I think people have seen slides like this before, but 74, 75% of our power is coming from coal. A little bit more than 20% was coming from nuclear. And then a smattering, just a very small amount was coming from gas, renewables, and of those renewables, primarily it was hydro, and then other renewables, which was wind and solar and everything else, was 0.3% in 1990. So it was basically, it was a hiccup at Sherco or Boswell. I mean, that's to be replaced without, there was no question about it. So in the early 90s, that's when people started, the organizations like CE and Fresh Energy and others started getting involved. And we, in the early 1990s, there was a deal that came out of the Prairie Island dry cask storage debate, and that put put wind on the Buffalo Ridge in southwestern Minnesota. And then there were the Minnesota's energy efficiency standard, and in the early 2000s, the renewable energy objective. So by the time we got to 2007, which is when Minnesota passed the renewable energy standard, actually renewables and that slice of the pie that we care about was getting to be quite a bit bigger. It, at that time, represented about 5% of total sales, of total power generated in the state. So it's not insignificant at this point. It's still small, but it's not insignificant. And then by 2013, after the renewable energy standard was passed, and what this shows is that policy works. Policy is what gets this done. Policy is what changes. Is that by 2013, after the renewable energy standard had passed, renewables, and wind in particular, 16% of Minnesota's electric system. It is very close to replacing nuclear. And I've been looking at the numbers, and I know the build-out of wind that is going to occur. And within the next 3 years or so, Minnesota, the second largest source of power in the Minnesota system, is going to be renewables. It's going to be wind. Wind is going to replace, it's not going to replace, but it will surpass nuclear as the second largest source of power on an energy basis, not on a capacity basis, but on an energy basis, it will replace or pass nuclear as the second largest source of energy in Minnesota. So it's been a huge transformation so far. And I liked one of the slides that I saw with Jared, the ship slide. And I think really what we see here is this is a battleship. And we're turning it, the rudder got jammed to starboard, in 1990, and it's very slowly starting to turn. And I'm reading a book right now by Malcolm Gladwell called The Tipping Point, and we're just kind of now at that tipping point. It's starting to move faster. And you can see it. The change between 2007 and 2013 was very significant. Much faster than the change between 1990 and 2007. And what's happening next, what we're moving into, within the rest of my presentation is going to focus on, is my assessment, and not just my assessment, but where I think we're going, and where some people that I've worked with on this presentation agree that we're going. And one point that I really want to make is the next slide here. To push back on this, the idea that the policies that we put in place have been expensive, that they have been bad for bill payers, for rate payers. I'm not going to disagree that rates in some cases are rising and will rise. But these policies that we've enacted in Minnesota's rates and Minnesota's, the average price of electricity, according to the Energy Information Agency, not from an advocacy group, but according to the EIA, Minnesota has some of the lowest rates in the upper Midwest. Well, our rates are significantly lower than the national average, and lower than many of the states that we compete with, who haven't taken these approaches that we've done, who haven't done what we've done, that have, Michigan and Wisconsin. So I think it's really important that we push this message out that this has been good for ratepayers. It has been good for bill payers. Minnesota, according to the EIA 2014 data, has the third lowest electricity prices in the Midwest. I think that's a message that we need to get out there. So this right here is, I think I got something that turned around a little bit, but this is 7 years of megawatt generation and consumption data. And I know nobody can see this really well, but you'll just have to take me, I'll interpret it for you. But what you see here is that the 7-year trends, and I did the 7-year trends here for people. But the 7-year difference in coal megawatt hours are dropping significantly. Now 2012 and 2013 are maybe not the best years, but they're the years we've got because Sherco 3 was offline, which is our largest power plant in the state, our largest coal power plant in the state. But the trend is unmistakable. Coal megawatt hours are down. Nuclear megawatt hours have kind of trended down a little bit lately. I think that's because of the work that's been done on them. Unmistakable, the wind numbers are up, massively up. Wind right now is 8 million megawatt hours, a little bit more than 8 million megawatt hours of power each year comes from wind. That's a 3-fold increase from 2007. 3 times more wind in Minnesota today than in 2007. It's a massive increase. Basically when you compare it, Minnesota has replaced coal megawatt hours lost with wind megawatt hours. It's almost a 1-to-1 replacement. Natural gas is up a little bit. Imports are up a lot over the last couple of years, but I think that's because of Sherco 3 being up. But the big trend too is that what you'll notice is that the state's retail sales are flat. We flatlined. We're basically range bound between about 68 million megawatt hours, which is an indicator that the efficiency that we have on the system is really working. We are kind of in between 68 million megawatt hours. So these big trends, this is a lot of what I've been talking about, but the key takeaway here is that Minnesota is decarbonizing. This bipartisan energy policy that we passed over 27 years that we've been working on with stakeholders like Lynn and others in the room, where we've gotten together in stakeholder groups and the utilities that we've got working on this, which they've done great work and made great progress. The end result is that Minnesota is decarbonizing. Right now we are decarbonizing. That's the key takeaway. And that's where we are today. So, the macro drivers affecting the fleet. And I think that at this point I just want to make a couple kind of asterisks so people know that what I'm getting into next is really, it's an art, not a science. I've had to make certain judgment calls, but these are kind of foundational principles. The public is demanding cleaner indoor power plants. Jared is absolutely right. That is, people want newer and cleaner stuff. Low gas prices and low wind prices in Minnesota are putting extreme pressure on the coal and nuclear fleet. Uneconomic and old coal facilities are closing. The Clean Power Plan is a macro driver on the fleet. And then in the out years, like in the 2030 to 2035 timeframe, that's when the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's 20-year licenses for Minnesota's nuclear reactors will expire. Now, I don't know what's going to happen to those, and I don't think anybody does yet. But that is, it's still there. Those power plants, right now, if everything remains the same, they will come off in 2031, 2033, and 2034, and they are a massive amount of power and a massive amount of opportunity. Some interesting facts about the coal power plants in Minnesota. We did this research a couple years ago. I have been brushing up on it over the last week or so, and I'm glad that this data is still good. It makes me feel good about my own research. But we've got 18 coal power plants in Minnesota. A lot of these are smaller. We've got really 4 big ones. And it's about 4,800 megawatts of capacity. The average capacity factor for these power plants, when you average them all together, is about 55%. If you just look at the 4 big ones, it's about 65%. But here's how we get into the analysis, is that nationally the average age of a coal generator is 45 years old. The average age of Minnesota's coal generators is 46 years old. Now, the The oldest Minnesota coal generator is 65 years old. And nationally, if you sweep away all the other factors, but if you just look at the age of a unit at closure, when a coal power plant retires, if you just look at the age, what's the average age? According to the Energy Information Agency, the average age of a retired coal plant is about 55 years old. So we've got a lot of power plants that are kind of in the chute. They're moving towards what one would think would be the end of their life. Minnesota has 1,800 or so megawatts of coal that's 50 years or older. Now, if you kind of plot this out, what does this look like? And we have two sources of information based on to make this graph. The first source is what are announced retirements. So the utilities tend not to make a coal retirement announcement 15 years out. They make them, 5 years, like, oh, we're going to retire this in 5 years. So you have really good data for the 5-year chunk that, 2015 to 2020. But the data after that, you have to make a judgment call. The judgment call we made was, if a power plant is paid off, if it is fully depreciated, then the utility is no longer earning money on it. So it's vulnerable. The utility, it's no longer an asset to the utility in the way that, that they're not getting shareholder value off of it. They're not being able to depreciate it any longer. So it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to retirement. So 2015 to 20 are actual announced retirements. After that, those are power plants that we deem as vulnerable because they're paid off. And the source of that information is all depreciation filings at the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. Some people might say, well, we might want to keep an older power plant open because it's really inexpensive power at that point. Sure, that happens. But at the end of the day, it is a vulnerable power plant. It's getting older because it's paid off. It's like an old car. At any point in time, you could knock off, and the decision would be at that point, I'm going to buy a new car. So what you see here is there's a lot of power that's coming off or projected to come off between now and 2040. Now that number right there, the 2035 to 2040 number also does not include nuclear, or the 2030 to 2035 number does not include the nuclear facilities. This is just coal retirements. So all of this capacity coming off is clean energy opportunity. This is going to have to be replaced. This is going to be replaced by solar, by wind, by energy efficiency, and by natural gas. And what we want is we want the right amount of natural gas. We don't want to go long on natural gas. So what does this look like? I mean, what does the pie chart start to look like when you take this coal data when it's coming off, and then you just kind of start dumping it into megawatt hours that need to be replaced? And that was the challenge that we did here. And this is what we tried to do, is just take this information and put it in a way that was easily consumable so people could see what the clean energy opportunity is. And again, we made some assumptions. We made some assumptions that we would have small amount of growth. Maybe the current evidence suggests that we're not going to have as much growth. That'll push the number down. But we assumed that we would fulfill the renewable energy standard, which we are going to. We're going to do that ahead of time. And that we'll fulfill the solar energy standard, which I think we'll probably do ahead of time as well. And then, now what's that missing capacity because of the announced retirements? And it's about the 2.4% of the total system sales is going to have to be replaced. That's our clean energy opportunity. That's your market before now in 2020. And a lot of that has already been subscribed. And a lot of that is, we've got new wind that's coming online. We've got solar community gardens. We've got the solar build-out, utility solar build-out that's happening. We've got some new natural gas plants that's coming out. So that's been subscribed. As we get to the 2030 electricity profile, now we're talking about, and actually some of this has been subscribed already too, because Sherco 1 and 2 have been announced, and Xcel has said their plans for that. But we're starting to see that clean energy opportunity is becoming a very large piece of the pie. I also assume here a renewable energy standard of 40%. Anybody following Minnesota politics knows that did not happen, but it's still a policy that people are pushing for. And we have a solar energy standard, a goal of 10%. neither of which are current state law, so the clean energy opportunity is larger because I've baked those into this analysis. But the point is that the capacity that is coming offline over the next 15 and 20 years is massive, and it's a massive market that is going to be fulfilled by clean energy. So by 2030, you can see that this clean energy is quite significant. The clean energy opportunity by 2030 is 12% of the total system. That's a lot of power. It's a lot of market. And now is when we really we see the ship has made a complete turn when we go to 2035, where the nuclear facilities have come off, almost all of the power plants have come off. Oh, and one other point I want to make is that what I did for convenience purposes is I grouped the coal, all fossil fuel together. So all fossils together. The coal numbers are significantly lower than this. And I did that for convenience, so there weren't too many slices of the pie. But the clean energy opportunity by 2035 is massive. It's one third of the pie of the entire system, and what that reflects are the nuclear power plants, the large coal generators. So it's very significant. And then lastly, I mean, this is it right here. By 2040, which is less time between now and 2040, I mean, hold on, we all know that I'm not great at math, is that, we're not great at numbers, but between now and 2035 is less time than between now and 1990. So that we're really, the change that's going to be happening over the next coming years is going to be massive and significant and larger than what we've gone through. So 3/4 of the system will be changed out between now and 2040. And with that, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.